Welcome to How Not to DM, where we interview the very best dungeon masters on this plane of existence. I'm your host, Derek. Today I'm talking with Shedayne and Alley, two DMs from Florida who have been working together for a few years now on their publishing company Bramble Bush Books and also on their D&D game, which involves 20 plus players and a unique style of play. They have some great insight on common mistakes new DMs make and how communication helps the game be relevant for all of your players.
Hi, I'm Allie. I am the co-DM. I tend to mostly manage the people in the server, make sure things are running smoothly, make sure Shedayne is getting the stuff done that needs to be done, managing him, making sure he's getting enough sleep, all the good stuff. I'm also an artist, and I come up with a lot of the ideas for different animals and how different magical creatures would interact with the world. I work with animals, so it kind of comes naturally to me. And generally just kind of a force of nature.
That's awesome. And Shedayne.
Shedayne Barrett here. I'm at Bramble Bush Books on Twitter. Also, I'm the founder of Bramble Bush Books, a company that's going to be dealing with making third-party content for Dungeons and Dragons for all you players and DMs out there. On the server, I am the resident DM. Aside from Allie, like the only DM on there, which is unique in the case of West Monsters, which generally have many of them. And as pertains to this West Monsters style of play, I'm the one who runs the sessions, manages a lot of the prep, and makes a lot of the content that the players end up interacting with. It's incredible. I thoroughly enjoy it, and honestly, I can't imagine going back and playing a basic standard type game. I fully intend to, but it's going to be a transition period when I eventually go back. But yeah.
Yeah, you're really looking for some converts. All right. So tell us a little bit about how both of you got into D&D initially. Was it playing with friends? Was it family? Was it shows online?
I started with a few of my friends. One of my friends really got me into it, and she had a whole group, and we all met up, started playing his homebrew world that he had. I played the stereotypical Tabaxi rogue with sticky hands, chaotic neutral, the good stuff, good classic things. And I got super hooked, and after playing in some less than stellar games, I started my own. After, I think I played for about 8 months before I started DMing in a homebrew world. So, dive right in.
You gotta. And Shedayne, what about you?
Oh, boy. Unlike my dear friend and partner, Allie here, I jumped straight into Dungeons & Dragons as a DM. I've always knew about Dungeons and Dragons at a conceptual level, pop culture and everything. Has instilled it. I knew it was a game that existed out there, but I only really took the plunge after I ended up quitting my job and suddenly had a lot of free time on my hands. And around the time it was early 2018, late 2017, around the time, and so D&D YouTube had exploded. You had guys like SP Level 3, Runesmith, Davy Tappy, even. And so I had a lot of ways of being immersed into it, and kind of got a hand of some of the mechanics and everything. It was wow, I could probably run a game in this. And so I decided to take the full plunge, using a whole bunch of different online resources to kind of help me out, to wrap my head around the game mechanics. I have a special place in my heart for all the different websites that are hosting the SRD, because I didn't have any of the books or anything. When I eventually wrangled a group of my friends together and got them to play D&D with me as their DM, when I was little, I wrote a lot. The only issue was I never really had a solid interest that kind of allowed me to extrapolate and kind of improve and advance my writing. The closest thing that came were like written text RPs between me and my friends at the time. But when I took, when I finally got into Dungeons and Dragons, it just kind of clicked. It held my interest like nothing ever did, and was a really amazing creative outlet for me. And so I would spend a lot of time prepping for like my first campaign that I was running at the time, and writing like tons. I have so many Google documents like dedicated to like the lore and like other mechanics, bygone subclasses and other homebrew that are admittedly, in hindsight, not all that awesome. I might go back and take a second stab at them. They may just remain forever within the graveyard of as casualties of me getting better. But when it comes to like the design portion of it, I just view that as well as like another form of creative expression, and also like problem solving. Because a lot of the time, my concepts that I come across when I'm trying to like make a new subclass or magic item or anything, it's a situation of, okay, how can I fulfill this concept in play in like a satisfying, fulfilling way mechanically, and while also making sure that it's balanced and evocative and satisfying for like the players to interact with. A lot of the inspiration comes from situations where I like see another DM or game designer take a crack at a concept, and I like look at him and it's like, I wonder how I would do it, and then I would then go and spend the next hour and a half of my life making my own version of tackling the similar concept. Sometimes my inspiration comes from the Unearthed Arcana when I see it and then just get filled with rage. Go on.
Yeah.
Oh, and you just feel like you can do it better. That makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Currently, the one that is that the first release, the Way of Tranquility Monk, Wizards actually released a version of it previously in Unearthed Arcana. Eventually, through places and everything, it became what is now the Way of Mercy Monk, which, in my opinion, 101% better than the Way of Tranquility that they released in the Arcana. But it did stray away from the concept that they originally were going after, which was basically a monk that dealt more so in peaceful dealings and healing rather than bare knuckles combat. And so I, in creating the Way of Tranquility Monk for Bramble Bush Books, tried to stay true to that original conceit of it.
Yeah, I really liked reading through that, and to your point, I feel like you definitely did that kind of archetype justice. What about you, Allie? Oh, sorry. Yeah, what about you, Allie?
I've always liked making stuff. I've always drawn, and I've always focused more on drawing more animals. I've always sucked at drawing people. And a few years ago, I guess it must be like almost 4 years ago now, I drew a few spreads of like in-depth analysis on how dragons would work biologically, anatomical, all that fun stuff. And I never I kind of thought about like, oh, maybe I should like do something with this, but never really did. And then I showed Shedayne them. I'm like, oh yeah, I did this whole thing, because he was talking about wanting to do something with D&D, and he fell in love. Mm-hmm. And so we have this whole thing called Draconum now that are like dragon adjacent. And I get to have full reign with those. And I love just creating fun, different creatures and monsters. And I tend to just love the storytelling aspect of showing what's going on in a world by the culture that you see. Like I have another doc that's just only very specific drow culture things. And me and Shedayne had a whole thing about the marriage customs of drows versus high elves and like all that sort of stuff. I love just the in-depth look at culture and things, because I grew up in the intersection of 3 cultures, or more likely 4, because there's Puerto Rican, Mexican, New York, and then just South Florida.
Yeah.
And so always been interested in seeing how those all connect, where different things come from. And I love seeing it all.
Yeah, that's quite the mix, and I'm sure that brings you a lot of interesting perspectives to your writing too. All right, so you both have mentioned Bramble Bush Books. Talk to us about what that is, and kind of your vision for what you want it to become.
Oh boy. Bramble Bush Books is a company created by myself and my wonderful co-DM, Allie here. Much like how you mentioned, the idea for the company did come up at one of our sessions where he showed me his book full of all of these anatomically correct dragons, and we're just like, we should totally collaborate in making a book. You making like the drawings of like the anatomy and everything, and I'll like focus on making the like mechanics and the stat blocks for them, and we can like work together on that. But that original idea has since spiraled and grown to like the creative upstart that it currently exists. At present, we are currently working towards the release of a supplement called The Adventurer's Almanac, where each issue of it will feature 26 entries based on the lore of the Bramble Bush campaign setting, which is Abraxas. It will include monsters, magic items, locations, NPCs, plenty of like lore and cultural things that DMs can take in and use in their own worlds, as well as mechanics for both DMs and players. Currently, the plan is to have each of the issues be released in full on Patreon, but I have a special place in my heart for the like free sharing of information and resources, especially for DMs and players, since I got into the game for like a good 3 to 4 months, was only using online free resources. And I kind of want to pay forward that by every week we release something for free on like all of our socials that other DMs and players can use as resources. If we can one day move that up to being a daily release of free content, I will absolutely take it. For right now, kind of keeping things geared towards achievable goals. Another very long distance ambitious goal is like at one point to be able to release a year's worth of issues in one hardcover edition, and have that be like a yearly release that will have like additional mechanics and entries within it. But that's like a lofty goal, and we have like a lot to learn and achieve before we're able to get there. But if we are able to do it, it'll be well worth it.
Yeah, that sounds like a really cool goal. Let's go on to the next question then, and we'll start with you, Allie. What was your first experience DMing like? What kind of adventure were you running, and tell us how it went.
So I dived in deep end. I made a homebrew world, an archipelago full of magical creatures, because of course I love the magical creatures and think about how that all interacts.
Mm-hmm.
And I started with a couple of my like close friends, just like, hey, I want to try DMing. Do you guys want to hop in? I ended up with a group of only tieflings, one of which was a homebrew tiefling cross. So it was tiefling and siren. So I had 2 tieflings and a tiefling siren that were all running around working for this queen who turned out to be evil and draining all the peasants of blood to prevent famine and stuff like that. And it went well. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what to do and what not to do, how to actually properly direct the players. And it was all a very like fun, like low-key campaign. Different. So now they're actively working against the queen. And it's like, oh no, but now they have to work for the queen, but they don't want to. And it's a whole thing.
Yeah. Intrigue, confusion, and a lot of content. It's been great.
All right, Shedayne, your first experience.
Oh boy! As I mentioned previously, my first game was as a DM at a table with a bunch of friends that I had managed to humor into playing along with my new obsession. It started as a homebrew one-shot, but it eventually became what is Abraxas, the campaign setting that the West March takes place in. I apparently done a decent enough job because my friends were pretty hooked and expanded the campaign beyond that simple one shot into a proper wide standard campaign, conversations that we would end up like having just about the game as we're just like hanging out would end up seamlessly transitioning into impromptu sessions. And so it wasn't uncommon for us to just be hanging out, and then we're just like, oh, I want to like go and talk to the enchanter. Like, I'm definitely going to be doing that next session. And it's like, yeah, I also would like to be doing this. And it's like, we just do that right now. And we just would.
Walk us through some of your most memorable mistakes you've made at the table, and you know, maybe how you could have prevented them.
Oh boy.
I let my players have a little bit too much reign, too much freedom. I didn't give them enough direction at one point, which led to an entire session of just them detailing their morning. Since I tend to let my players like have a lot of control over what they're doing and when, and I give them how the world reacts. I let them interact with the world, but they drive it forward. And I didn't give them enough direction in that case, and we wasted 4 hours on an in-game 1 hour. And so now I give them a little bit more direction. I tend to I steer them. I don't railroad them. I steer them like, hey, this is what's going on over here. Let's keep it moving.
Powerful pacing lesson then.
Yeah.
Shedayne, what about you?
It was all like rooted in basically a lack of proper communication. In its growth, the campaign that was running took on a bit of a different atmosphere. Things grew like gradually, the stakes kind of grew higher. And while I believe that it was only like natural for it for campaign to like progress from like more lighthearted to more dire situations, I had never really touched base. And after the arc itself ended in a rather climactic event, a hiatus was had so that I could properly plan and get ready for the next part of the campaign. The night the campaign was to restart, only 3 of my then 7 players were sat at the table. I kind of read the writing on the wall. It wasn't until like later that I ended up finding out the situation when it came to the other 4 players, that they were feeling burnt out and preferred the more lighthearted direction the campaign previously had. I enjoyed like a solid month of preparation in between the first arc and like the beginning of the second, but I made the biggest flaw because I didn't properly communicate or like ask them how like they were liking a direction or approach, or like gauge their emotion towards it throughout that time of me doing that prep. And if I had, I probably would have been able to prevent a rather dreadful experience.
Yeah, it's kind of an eternal struggle between the players and the DM, right? The DM has a story they might want to tell or think sounds compelling, but it might not be the story that the players want to play through, or, you know, the things they want to pursue. So it's always important to strike that balance. Walk us through what a West Marches style campaign is, and, you know, what it's good for, maybe what it's not good at, and why you really enjoy it.
So before Shedayne explains how unorthodox ours is, I'm going to give the more typical West March, which I believe one of my previous DMs ran one, where you'll have a couple DMs and what amounts to a one-shot, where it's basically a self-contained little mission, maybe 2 sessions, just to kind of do one little mission here with a small group of players out of a big pool to kind of just get your D&D fix in. We run a very different one, which Shedayne will explain, that's a lot more like a typical campaign, split into different groups in a huge world that can interact with each other.
So, for instance, you could set up a game that's like working for a guild of some kind, and whoever shows up, you do a job for the guild that night, and then you don't have to have the same players there for story continuity next time. That's kind of the idea.
And
yeah, so you could have a quest board on the local tavern. It's like, oh, rats in the cellar, or cultists, or all those little kind of quests, or maybe there's a goblin bro that keeps robbing people, like that sort of thing. That it's it's not large and overarching, and you could have I think a lot of school D&D groups run what amounts to West March, where you play with whoever's there.
Yeah.
You don't need a set cast, and it's not very story heavy.
All right, so what makes your game different than that?
Oh
even?
boy. When I originally watched the Matt Cole video where he was like detailing the West March, the thing that really took me and kind of made me want to attempt it was the idea that it was completely player driven, like their own desires and what they wanted to achieve within the game world guided the progression and the flow of the campaign. And that's kind of the seed that I planted to eventually grow what the campaign currently is. Another thing that's like different from the typical West March is the fact that an overarching story does exist in a sense. Like the world is consistent and it has things going on in it that the players will interact with, but the key focus and the drive for the progression of the story isn't like the overarching story with the world, but each character's own individual stories that intertwine and like mix, mingle, meet, and like butt heads, and that flow of these 20 plus player characters existing within one world, all having their own ends that they're trying to achieve, but doing so in like the same concurrent world and setting is what kind of births a lot of situations you wouldn't see in a typical campaign.
Yeah, that does sound very unique. I know you mentioned to me while we were talking about setting up this interview, you are always looking for or welcome to new players joining in. So we'll have to make sure to tell everyone how they can find you guys at the end here. What are some of your favorite moments that have happened in games that you've been players in or have been running? It could be combat, it could be role play, it could be improv. What are some of the best moments that you can think of?
God, there's so many.
Oh man.
We've had so many fun, interesting, dramatic, high tension moments that should be just cinematic. They need to be movies.
It's the moments where the situations have been properly aligned, and then like whether it's the introduction of the situation or the aftermath of it, where the players have had like now have free reign over the situation and are just interacting as like their characters are just interacting with it and kind of and with it and each other. And I, as a DM, just get to stand back, kind of take off my DMing hat for a hot second and just watch as they kind of process and deal with the situation, have like a proper conversation, heart to heart, in moments where you get like genuine like connection between the characters and the atmosphere around. You could just cut with an intention. You could cut with a knife. Like those moments are what I like live for.
Yeah, I love the way you described that. To me, it's like I'm a fly on the wall of a movie that I helped produce but like didn't write.
I have a perfect analogy for it. It's entirely like being a director. The greatest moments for directors are when they just get to sit back and just bask in the glory of it and just like cut, print, we're done. That's it. That's the take we're using. Those are the moments where I feel I've like achieved greatness as a DM.
I always view DMing as you're a player too, you just have a different role. Just because you're a DM doesn't mean you're not supposed to have fun. You're not the all-powerful god, even though that's how a lot of people like to think of it. You're a player too, you're just also, you have the meta knowledge behind it. You are the fourth wall. Your job is to help your players along in the story that you guys are creating together. And so I just enjoy those little things. I enjoy the RP. I enjoy seeing the players interact with different things. I enjoy seeing them have fun. And I also enjoy participating in it.
All right, let's go ahead and wrap up then with your parting words of wisdom and encouragement for new and aspiring DMs. If you could give, all of those DMs out there one piece of really good advice that you've learned, what would it be?
Talk to your players. Talk to your players. Have fun. Don't focus on being the perfect DM. Focus on telling a good story and having a good time with your players and making sure everyone at your table has fun. If your players are worth playing with, they'll understand a first-time DM stumbling over rules or not knowing every single ounce of content. Find yourself some good players and
have fun.
Go for it.
I honestly think that's some of the best advice I heard too. Right? It was just jump in, get your feet wet, figure it out. No one does it perfectly, and everyone's always learning. So that was probably the best advice I heard too. Well, thank you both for joining me this evening. I've really enjoyed our chat. I can tell you both have a lot of passion for what you do, and I love talking to people who are passionate about their projects and about their hobbies. So tell us where everyone can find your work, and if they're interested in following your journeys and joining in on your games.
Follow Bramble Bush Books as we go on into the future to make great, awesome content for all you players and DMs out there. You can follow us closely on our social media on Twitter at Bramble B Books. The Twitter handle is at Bramble B Books. We'll also be dropping a link to our Patreon. You can also find us on there as, I believe it's Bramble Bush Books on Patreon. Don't quote me on there. But yes, links and everything will also be on our Twitter. So yes.
I'll make sure to put those in the blog post as well. Well, thanks both for joining us. And like I said, I'll be posting the relevant links to their work, so you can go ahead and check that out. And I hope you have a great rest of your night.
You too. It's been nice
Thanks
talking
for listening,
to you.
viewers, and thank you, Derek, for hosting and having us here.
Thanks so much for listening to How Not to DM. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review and share the show with your friends and family. For episode guest announcements, links to our Discord community, blog, and social media accounts, visit @HN2DM on Twitter. If there's a DM out there who you think would be cool to hear from on the show, email us at hownottodm@gmail.com and we'll be in touch. Our awesome intro and outro music is by my good friend Torin. And until next week, roll some nat 20s for me.